All right, so welcome to the show today. We've got David Shriner-Cahn today on the show, who is the CEO and founder of 10 Strategic Partners and also the host of the podcast Smashing the Plateau. So, David, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Daniel. It's great to be here.
So, tell us a little bit about your story. So, what is the brief story that got you where you are today?
Well, as you can tell from the color of my hair, I didn't start working yesterday. And the story is that I was trained actually as an engineer. I started my career as a chemical engineer. After many years of schooling, worked in the corporate world for a few years. And then I decided that I really wanted to do something quite different with my life. Ended up going into the nonprofit sector, where I spent more than 2 decades in management and leadership roles. That's where I learned a lot about management and leadership. And in 2006, I started my own company, 10 Strategic Partners. Initially, my conception was, I just wanted to be my own boss. I thought I'll start a consulting company. I've hired lots of consultants. I've worked with lots of consultants. Seemed pretty straightforward to me, and I thought I could, be a consultant to the sector that I just came out of, which sounded fine. What ended up happening was, yes, I did launch. I did get the kinds of clients that I thought I would get, and I started doing some networking and picking up private business clients, which was kind of a new sector for me, and I started learning a lot about entrepreneurship. So then I combined the management and leadership skills that I had with what I was learning about entrepreneurship, and really got excited about what I was seeing in the world. And that, in my opinion, accelerated greatly when the recession went into full gear, starting in 2008. The whole world of employment changed so much worldwide. When I first entered the working world, it was the beginning of the shift from what I would say is like the post-World War II model of big corporate, especially in America, big corporate employment. And the model, especially as an engineer, I was taught, you study a skill or a profession, and if you're well trained, you can get a good paying job. You go to work for a big corporation, you work there for 30, 40 years, you retire, you get a pension, and it supports your lifestyle for as long as you're going to live. Well, that didn't quite work out for a lot of people the way it was sort of envisioned. The corporate world changed quite a bit. In America, the way retirement got funded changed, which impacted the way that worked as well. And you have people living longer and needing more funds to be able to support their lifestyle in retirement. And I think then what happened with technology in like the 90s and particularly the early 2000s, leading us into then what happened in the change in the global economy starting in 2008 has led to a huge rise in entrepreneurship. And even inside companies, the way people think about jobs has a much more entrepreneurial spin on it than it ever did before. And the kind of sort of employer-employee loyalty that I was led to believe existed 30 or 40 years ago, it's so different today. And young people first starting out in their working lives look at the relationship with an employer on a totally different level. They're looking at it as a much more open, collaborative, innovative relationship. They want to work for companies that are doing good things in the world. It's not just about getting a paycheck and supporting a lifestyle. It's like, I want to leave a positive imprint on this world by the time I leave this world. I think that's much more prevalent among younger people today than it was a generation ago. So I'm seeing huge shifts. And in my case, I'm so thrilled to be part of this world. Then I started doing some content creation about 5 years ago. and started a podcast 3 years ago. That's how you and I met. We met through another guest who's been on my podcast. And being able to interact with people through technology and other means all over the world, to collaborate, to discuss issues like we're discussing on your show today, and to be able to do business together in ways that just wouldn't have happened 20, 30 years ago.
I absolutely agree. It is an incredible shift. And I'm curious about like what got you into where you are today. So what inspired you to move into that area of leadership development, of that? What inspired you to go into that?
Frankly, it was totally by accident. I mean, I went into the nonprofit world because I just wanted out of corporate. I wanted to do something that I thought had more meaning in the world than where corporate life was in the 1980s. And I made some sort of like what I think most people do, which is like, who do I know? Who can I talk to? Who can I ask? Who can I ask for advice? And it's kind of one thing led to another, and that ended up leading to a job and then a new field. And I wasn't specifically looking for management and leadership. It was sort of like, what am I really good at? What can I sell myself into? Who needs what I have to offer? And I was somebody who was good at getting things done. Partly my engineering training, partly my own skill set. And what that means is, I had sort of the basic skills to be a good manager. And then I'm a lifelong learner. So whatever I didn't have, I found ways to learn how to do it. And it turned out I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed putting the pieces together to, we have a problem we have to solve. We have resources available to help us solve it. In particular, some of those resources are people. What do we need to do to get from point A to point B? And how can we do that collectively? That's, basic management. Absolutely true. Yeah. I mean, it should be basic management. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but I'm saying that's what it is. So I kind of fell into it and I really loved it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Just basically following that path of you call it sort of like a coincidence. I think it has to do a lot with intuition as well, just following the next step without really knowing exactly where it's going to lead you at the end of the tunnel, and just going with that gut feeling as well many, many times. So along the way of your journey, what were some of the main challenges that you have faced?
Well, there are various challenges. One is in my first job as a manager, I was in my late 20s, and one of my direct reports was probably 35 years older than me. That was an interesting challenge and this was a fast growing organization. So how to manage somebody who's significantly older, who's very set in her ways in an organization that, if I can't get her to make some shifts, the organization is not going to be able to grow, and she would suffer, the organization would suffer, and this organization didn't really have the resources to work around her. So that was an interesting challenge, and I learned how to be a respectful supervisor, and yet kind of make step-by-step changes in behavior.
So how did you go about that? I mean, I faced a very similar challenge when I took over two teams when I was like 28 or something, or 26 or 27. So I faced a very similar challenge. So I'm very curious, like, how did you actually get over that, with the age difference, but also with, the mindset?
So one of the most important tasks of a manager or supervisor is to support the success of your direct reports. It's really not about you, it's about them. It's just like when you're serving customers. And in essence, it's like they're your customers. And you need to have the mindset that you're there to help them succeed. And it's not just about the success in the particular job. It's about their success in life. So you need to have empathy. You need to be a really good listener. You need to be respectful. And you need to understand what are the tools and the resources that they need in order to be successful in their goals. And have an open line of communication about what you expect from them, and make sure that there's an open line of communication so you can hear what they're expecting of you. I think if you start with that mindset, you will be much more successful. That's
a really good piece of wisdom, because it's so easy to look at that role and just think about yourself. That is the easiest thing. So now I'm curious about your path as an entrepreneur. What is, maybe just let's pick one. What is one of the most challenging situations that you faced as an entrepreneur?
Well, starting my business. I'd never started a business before. I'd run lots of organizations of all different sizes. And it's very different when you run an organization that you don't own versus one that you do own. So there are a lot of things I had to learn. And
I'm just curious about that. Let's dive into that. Because that is a really interesting thing, because sometimes I work with these senior executives, senior managers that start their own companies and then they're completely lost. But they've been running multi-million, sometimes multi-billion organizations, and they start their own company and they're completely lost. So in your experience, what is the main difference? Obviously not from a business perspective, but more from a personal perspective, between running, a large organization that you don't own and running your own company.
I can tell you one that I see, which is there's a big difference between selling something that where the revenue becomes part of either your department's budget or your company's budget, versus selling something that goes into your own pocket. Right? It's very it's the difference between something being somewhat abstract and being really personal.
I love that. That's a really, really good one. Because sometimes I also find it's very close to that. I think that basically when you start your own company, and even if you start hiring a team, you're still most of the company yourself. And that brings with it that you have different roles. So that usually you create things and you sell things at the same time. And it kind of like goes in that direction of selling yourself, which like people who, I've worked with senior business development executives who've, closed multi-million-dollar deals consistently. And then they go out on their own, so to say, and they completely lost with selling themselves. So I feel
it's very different.
Yeah.
It sounds subtle, but it isn't really so subtle. So that's a big difference. I would say another one is, what is it that you, especially in a service business, there's a fine line between what you don't charge for versus what you do charge for. Especially, I know you work a lot in this whole idea of being in the conscious economy and the fact that we need to be collaborative. So where does collaborative mean? We're helping one another and we just do it, and we're essentially donating our time to do it, versus when is it appropriate to be charging for something? And that's not always clear.
That's a really, really good point. And so the way I look at it, if I may share my perspective, is from my own experience, when you're crystal clear about your business model, that is easy. When you're sort of like thinking about different ways of, maybe there's another bit of revenue I can make, maybe there's another, it becomes really difficult to make that decision. So I had both examples in my own company, and I think when you're really clear about like what it is, like how does the business model, the revenue model really work? Where are all the pieces? Where do you really make money? Because when you know that, you can then also make the the calculations and say, okay, everything else is just simply support for that revenue model. And from my own experience, that's when that was clear, easy. When that was not clear, oh my God, very, very difficult.
Correct. Like if you're doing just basic business networking, if you are having a coffee meeting with somebody, what is it that is appropriate to offer to help somebody with? And at what point, and if you're networking with a peer, is it appropriate or inappropriate to sell yourself if that person would benefit from your services? I know specifically in certain kinds of peer groups, it's totally forbidden to sell your services to another member of the group. It's like, even if what they want is exactly what your company delivers, you need to refer them to a competitor.
Yeah, that is a fine line. And there's certainly, peer-to-peer groups that facilitate that specifically, and others that completely prevent it out there. And it's a good point. There's always that fine line in there. So about the company you're running, what are some of the major projects that you're working on right now? What are some of the most exciting things you're working on right now?
Actually, one of the most exciting things that we're working on right now is the new Facebook group that supports Smashing the Plateau, where it's an open forum for, and it's free. It's an open forum for anyone to raise issues about their particular plateaus, get input from me. I've had over 300 guests on my show, and some of the top entrepreneurs in the last few decades, ranging from Ric Edelman, who's one of the most successful financial advisors in the U.S., who started his company back in the 1980s, to John Lee Dumas, who's the host of the podcast Entrepreneur on Fire, with millions of listeners. Gretchen Rubin, who is who has the podcast about happiness and is also a famous author and speaker. So it's an opportunity for people to raise issues, and I'm in there all the time to be able to address what are these roadblocks. Because what I see happening all the time is people who are experienced leaders, they come across roadblocks they haven't experienced before, and whatever is in their experience set or their toolkit, for whatever reason, isn't working. And if they look ahead at what they dreamed to achieve before their story ends, they see where they are now. And in spite of all their experience, if the gap between the two is not getting any smaller, it's cause for tremendous anxiety. So what I really love that we're doing is this community that we've created through Smashing the Plateau, where we're able to help one another address some of these kinds of problems that keep coming up.
I love that. And I kind of like goes into the next question, because I want to get your perspective on where we're heading. Like, where do you see the role of a leader or leadership in general heading in the future, where now everything seems to become digital, and robots and AI takes over roles and work that we could never have imagined 5 years ago that a machine could do it? Where do you see it go with? Where do you see the role of leadership and the role of a leader go in that really close future?
Well, as the leader, I think you need to understand that you have many stakeholders, and the lines between the different kinds of stakeholders used to be really well defined. I think they're really getting blurrier and blurrier. So you have people who are part of your internal team, and I'm and I would call them internal team as opposed to employees. And in different countries, the work rules are different. But essentially, if you're looking at somebody who might be an employee versus a contractor, I think those lines are becoming much more blurry. And employees used to primarily derive their income from one source, which was one employer. I think that is changing, and people are more and more deriving income, even as employees, from multiple sources. And they may be called contractors as opposed to employees because of the work rules of the country. So you have people who are internal to your organization who are on your team. You have people who are external. And I think the line between the two is becoming blurry because of these sort of multiple relationships. Technology has allowed those multiple relationships to grow exponentially. So it's so easy to bring on a team member who doesn't work with you face to face. And I know I've talked to so many people, in particular on my podcast, who have team members they've never met from all over the world. It's really easy to do it. So you have your stakeholders who are your team members, whether they're internal or they're external. You have customers, and customers can sort of run the gamut. They're consumer customers, business customers. There are customers that are buying products, they're buying services, they're buying experiences, maybe some combination of the three. You have people who are part of your marketing engine who may be team members, they may be customers, or they may be neither. You know, if you look at what's going on in the digital world with things like the Facebook group we've started, where there are people who may be your big evangelists who've never bought anything from you because they don't need what you sell, but they love what you do and they love what you stand for. And they can be tremendous assets to your vision as a leader. So you need to understand that you're speaking to lots and lots of different people. Obviously, if you have investors who are part of your business, they're part of your stakeholders. You may have people who are in some kind of advisory role who may or may not be paid for it, who can be extremely helpful. I've talked a lot on my show with guests about the role of mentors and coaches. So there are paid mentors, there are people who are unpaid mentors. It's really important to learn from those who have accomplished things before us, learn from the examples of others. You have peers, informal peer support groups who are informal peers, and those kinds of networks are really important. Those kinds of relationships are important. Those are also your stakeholders. So as a leader, I think it's really important to be clear about what is your big vision? What is it that you really are driving to achieve in a big way? I love people who have these visions of, I want to get 1 billion people in the world to make a change in their habit that will improve the environment for the world. That's a grand vision. But if you don't have a grand vision, it's going to be really hard to accomplish something that is bold. So I love having a grand vision and being able to articulate it, really believing in it, having the courage to believe in it, to overcome your own self-doubt. We all have self-doubt. Having the humility to talk about what it is you're achieving and what it is you're having trouble with. Because when we have humility as a leader, it opens us up to be able to learn from the people around us. That's really important. And in today's world, with social media, there's nothing that's really private. So I think having humility is really important because it's going to come out there anyway. So trying to hide from what you think are your own inadequacies really is not going to cut it. What else is important for a leader? Oh, being a really good listener is paramount. Your primary job is to listen to your stakeholders. And it's kind of, it's marketing 101. Listen for what people's pain points are and try to solve them. That's your job as the leader of whatever it is you're offering. So listen careful, be respectful of others, realize that we live in a diverse world. There are 7 billion people on the planet, if not more, and we are a diverse set of human beings. Embrace that. Don't be afraid of it, and realize that there is power in diversity. The more diverse opinions you hear as a leader, the better your decisions will be. So embrace diversity. What else? Be respectful of others. Be a good questioner. That goes along with being a listener. Ask great questions. And put the pieces together. You know, your job as a leader is to connect people, put the puzzles together, and help the people you serve solve their problems. And if you do a good job at it, people will want to come back for more.
So this is great, and it's a lot of input. So if I'm trying to dissect it and put it into a pattern, what I'm hearing is that the company of today and tomorrow can no longer be managed, but it has to be led by design, because there's so many moving pieces that you have basically zero control over anymore. You know, 100 years ago, it may have been, you know, a rigid structure you can completely control with systems and procedures and automation, everything. And what I'm hearing is that the role of a leader today is actually to be a leader instead of a manager trying to manage the company. And that's kind of like what I'm hearing.
Yes, I agree totally. Yes, there's a role from good management, right? We want the trains to run on time, but somebody has to be able to envision that train tracks may be in a totally different form 10 years from now than they are now, and be open to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this is great. That was a ton of great insight. So if people want to connect with you, where can they find you? Where can they connect with you?
Well, they can certainly go to our website. I would suggest going to the website for the podcast first, which is smashingtheplateau.com. The podcast is called Smashing the Plateau. There you can get information about our free Facebook group. They can also connect with me on LinkedIn, David Shriner-Cahn. I believe I'm probably the only one in the world, so that shouldn't be hard. I'm based in New York. They can actually call our office using old-fashioned technology, the telephone that was invented 2 centuries ago. And the phone number is 212-731-0770. The phone does get answered by a live person during business hours, Eastern Time.
Excellent. Love it. Thank you so much, David, for being in the show.
Thank you, Daniel.